Let's take a look back onto the world. In the east, a barbaric and tribal people called the Dothraki become a more prominent race. At this point in history, there is yet to be a civilized nation. While the first men have shown signs of scattered organization, no groups have formed a competent civilization. In the current-day Westeros, most of the rulers have what is known as Valyrian steel swords. These swords, along with the dragonglass, are the only known weapons to be effective against the White Walkers. In the 8th episode of Season 5, their effectiveness is displayed when Jon Snow kills a White Walker with the Valyrian sword. When the sword touches a White Walker, it freezes it so cold it breaks it into pieces on the spot. Not only do these weapons kill White Walkers, they are also much more durable and powerful than regular steel. Like the samurai in the real world, the Valyrian swords are created through a very specific and secret process. But we are still before the time of these swords' creation. We'll get there later. Around 5,000 years ago, the uncivilized men of Essos come together to create the great empires of the ancient times. To the east, the Giscari Empire is formed from slavers. Its capital was Old Gis. The founder of this kingdom was called Grazdan the Great. He was seen as a deity to the people he ruled over. This empire marked the first time a king controlled an army. With his army, Grazdan and his predecessors conquered the surrounding regions and became the supreme rule of the time. Being the greatest empire of its time, it eventually came to an end a couple hundred years after its conception in a war with Valyria. Sheep herders around the peninsula in the middle of Essos began settling the place we know as the Valyrian Peninsula. Here, people discovered dragons and tamed them with magic. Legend has it that the people of Valyria are descendants of dragons themselves. Their distinctive features such as silver and gold hair and purple eyes not seen anywhere else in the world. The Valyrians and the Giscari were natural-born enemies because the Valyrians were built from free men. Even during their reign, they had no kings or queens. Every man had an equal say. During the next hundreds of years, 5 wars erupted between the two superpowers. The Giscari army had no chance against the fire-breathing dragons. In the 5th and final war, Old Gis was destroyed completely. The city was left to be destroyed by a dragon flame, and from the Giscari, the Valyrians learned about slavery. Their first slaves were the remaining Giscari people. In time, these Giscari slaves died laboring for the Valyrians, and soon the tongue of the Giscari was lost and High Valyrian takes its place. In the peace after the wars, the Valyrians discovered that the surrounding volcanoes, called the 14 Flames, were rich with ore. At the time, they mined copper and tin for their bronze weapons, and gold and silver for currency. Later they mined ore for their legendary Valyrian steel. The Valyrians' newfound workforce were the people who slaved the mines day and night. It is said that the number of deaths in the mines is so large it surely defied comprehension. As Valyria grew, its need for the ore increased, and in turn they sought out new lands to add to their empire. They expanded in all directions, conquering and enslaving everything in their path. Almost all of the major cities in Essos were formed out of the expansion of the Valyrians, including the free cities. Qohor and Norvos were founded through religious reasons. Old Volantis and Lys were founded from the wealthy merchants of Valyria. The people of these cities bought their way to their freedom, and chose their own rulers rather than the dragon-riding leaders sent from Valyria. The other cities were Pentos and Lorath, which are said to have been established before Valyria came to rule and paid homage to the Valyrians to keep their native ways. The most unique of the cities was Braavos. The city was founded not by wealthy merchants or men of the freehold, but instead by slaves. When Valyria was just on the peninsula, a huge slaving fleet was crippled by a slave revolt. It was a success, but the slaves realized if they were to go to the freehold, they would become slaves again. Together they rode to the furthest place they knew and established a city now known as Braavos. They remained secret for years until they revealed themselves. During this time, about 4 to 5,000 years ago, the Valyrians ruled with their dragons and superior steelworking skills, which consisted of an unknown magical ritual. Some believe this magic gave the steel its power, but once the catastrophe known as the Doom happened, the ritual was lost. Around this time, the 14 Flames erupted unknowingly. It is said that the fires burned so hot even dragons burned. Some of the survivors were known as the Rhoynar, a people who settled along the great rivers of Essos. Another more important people, who were the most responsible for making Westeros the way it is today, were the fine-haired people known as the Andals. What is left of Valyria is a smoke-ridden ruin, home to the people known as the Stone Men. These men fell victim to a supposedly incurable disease known as grayscale. Very few people have ventured into Old Valyria to loot its ancient cities except for a few. One of those is a new character in Season 6, known as Euron Greyjoy. Thank you for watching. Next time we'll be talking about the Andals and their conquest of Westeros.